morning, good day, and good evening, our viewers on our weekly Straight Talk program. As we move inexorably towards the long-awaited and much anticipated March the 2nd elections, many debates are taking place publicly and in the media, as well as public meetings as well. But this week, once again, a major issue has surfaced, and that is the twin issue of transparency and accountability. It is this twin issue that constantly attracts quite a lot of attention among the Guyanese population that we will speak about on this week's Straight Talk. The biggest bugbear or the biggest headache for the ruling coalition is this question of transparency and accountability. Why is it that a government which claims to have been democratically elected, a government which claims to have the people at heart, a government which claims that it is representing and acting on behalf of all the Guyanese people, have as a major challenge, as a big headache, the question of transparency and accountability? What is so difficult with a government that believes that it is administering the affairs of the country in the interest of all the Guyanese? Why is it they have this big problem with transparency and accountability? Why is it a major challenge for them? My friends, this question of transparency and accountability is now a global issue. The point I'm making is that it is not unique or peculiar to Guyana. All over the world, people, or for want of a better word, the masses of people are clamoring for transparency and accountability by governments in terms of administering the affairs of their country. Transparency and accountability has become a major issue, a clarion call, as it were, for peoples around the world, because they're demanding greater transparency and greater accountability on the part of their governments in terms of their affairs, public affairs, administrative affairs, political affairs, economic affairs, and even the financial, public safety and security affairs. All these are issues which the people around the world, including we in Guyana, are demanding greater transparency and accountability from the government, the coalition government of the day. It has become a major issue because there is a lack or loss of public trust on the part of the people towards the government of the day. And once there's a lack or loss of public trust on the part of the people across racial and political lines in our country, this whole question of transparency and accountability will become a big issue in the public domain. Only recently, the Integrity Commission published a report in which it stated that a large number of members of parliament and ministers of government have not submitted their annual returns in terms of their accountability issues to the Integrity Commission. And this is one of the reasons why transparency and accountability has become this major issue in today's debate. Because people generally expect, irrespective of who is in the government, that the ministers of government, particularly those who are drawing down resources, money from the public purse, money that is being paid by taxpayers. Taxpayers want to know how their money is being spent, how their money is being used, and to what extent they're benefiting from taxes which they're paying into the government coffers. And incidentally, only recently, the head of the GRA announced that more than $100 billion have been garnered in taxes over the past year. And so when government ministers and parliamentarians on the government benches refuse or neglect to submit their annual returns to the Integrity Commission, it raises eyebrows in many quarters. There's a hue and cry on this subject because, as I said, people expect those who sit in the corridors of power and those who warm the benches on the parliament and the government side would give account for their assets, their bank accounts, as we in the opposition have done. It is interesting to note that in the report published by the Commission last weekend, that not a single opposition member of parliament has been mentioned. And this is because ever since the Integrity Commission was established, PPP MPs, government ministers have taken their responsibility seriously in terms of accounting for their earnings, their properties, and whatever assets they might have to the Integrity Commission. And so this is a big slap in the face of the government when information is published to the effect that a large number of government ministers and MPs have not submitted their annual returns to the Integrity Commission. Herein again comes the question of transparency and accountability. What is it they're hiding? If there's nothing to hide, then submit your returns. If there's something to hide, then of course there will be reluctance to submit those returns. From the beginning, we've had challenges in pressuring the government to be transparent and to be accountable in whatever transactions the government might be engaged in. And that is why in the Auditor General's report for last year, we see so many gaps, so many discrepancies, so many absences of transparency and accountability in respect to the spending of monies allocated by the National Assembly to the government in the 2019 budget. A lot of money has not been accounted for. And even if it is accounted for, there are huge discrepancies in respect to these resources. It is important to bear in mind that this subject did not emerge with the assumption to government in 2015 by the coalition administration. It started even before. And we will deal with that at another time and place. Another issue that has been impacting this question of transparency and accountability is the humongous amount of lies and more lies that this government has been peddling in the public domain. In the first instance, when huge salary increases, comparable to those, or not, I should say, comparable to those which government ministers were receiving under the PPPC, was published and became known. The government, or spokespersons for the government, made all kinds of excuses. First of all, they denied that there was such an increase in the salaries until it was published in the official gazette. And they even tried their level best to cover up, and they give all kinds of reasons as to why this huge salary increase was granted. But the point that I'd like to make is that during the 2015 elections campaign, they were the ones that said they wanted a lean and clean government. What has actually happened is we've ended up with a mean and unclean government with these huge salaries that they've given to themselves when they'd never even turned a straw as they assumed office in the public administrations. A further lie and greater lie that we've been hearing is the question of the closure of sugar estates. We've heard all kinds of reasons, all kinds of excuses, all kinds of falsehoods. In fact, we've heard a lot of contradictions also. On the one hand, the president of the country saying that they closed the sugar estate to save the industry. On the other hand, some government spokespersons, including Mr. Ramjatan and Mr. Nagamoto, are saying that the estates had to be closed because the majority of sugar workers are supporters of the PPP. And in order to deny the PPP or to take away that support from the PPP, that is why the estates were closed. There you go. As the old people would say, mouth open, story jump out. So these are just basically two of the lies and more lies that were peddled and continue to be peddled by the administration. The whole question of governance also poses a question or the challenge of transparency and accountability. There is hardly a single Guyanese who feel comfort or feel comfortable with the way the government is conducting itself in office. They are very uncomfortable with the mood that has permeated the country because of the governance issues that the government has constructed within the society. There is a lot of talk about racial and political discrimination in the country, especially impacting the indigenous Amerindian communities in the far-flung parts of our country. Notwithstanding the fact that a lot of goodies are being doled out at this time when it's elections, the fact of the matter is that the Amerindian community has been the hardest hit in terms of racial and political discrimination on the part of the government. There are many on the coast also who are complaining and who are speaking out on this subject. In fact, the closure of sugar estates also bring into focus this question of racial and political discrimination. It is the only productive sector that employs a particular group of people within our society that have been hardest hit. Let us continue to discuss this question of transparency and accountability. And as we proceed, we now come to the question of disrespect for law and order. This is the greatest area that impacts the whole question of transparency and accountability. There's one issue that I'd like to focus in this respect, and that is the infamous and the famous no confidence motion. Infamous as far as the APNU AFC is concerned, but famous as far as parliamentary history and the people are concerned. The Caribbean Court of Justice made certain rulings about how the government should proceed following the passage and the consideration of the no confidence motion at the Caribbean Court of Justice. But lo and behold, notwithstanding the ruling of the court, we still hear the president himself and ministers of government talking about cabinet meeting, talking about cabinet decisions. How could there be meetings of the cabinet and decisions emerging from a cabinet which the Caribbean Court of Justice has ruled should have been dissolved months ago? We agree with certain rulings of the no confidence motion, but the no confidence motion and the ruling of the Caribbean Court of Justice alluded to how the government should function within the meaning of the rulings of the court. And a lot of it had to do with the government, as to how the court described it, as a caretaker government. A caretaker government is bound by the ruling of the court. And a caretaker government is constrained to not do certain things. For example, consideration and passage of a budget. They cannot do that. Nor can they sign contracts. Yet we see major contracts amounting to billions of dollars being signed off within the meaning of a caretaker government. And so the whole question of law and order, strictly limited to the question of the no confidence motion, we've seen gross disrespect for. The whole question of transparency and accountability also has to do with elections. First and foremost, we saw where the government, the president himself, bypassed the Constitution and appointed a chairman to the Guyana Elections Commission, meaning GCOM, without any consultation whatsoever with the leader of the opposition and without any respect for what the Constitution says as to how a chairman of the Elections Commission ought to be appointed. But it became clear as time went on that the APNUFC administration was buying time. And it was clear that they knew that the man was wrongly appointed, was appointed unconstitutionally, yet they went ahead and did that. Now there's another matter that has surfaced quite recently. This whole question of Guyanese citizenship or dual citizenship. It boggles the mind why a few days ago the president went to commission a building that had been completed and was made functional more than a year ago. This building now houses the Ministry of Citizenship or the Department of Citizenship. The president went there, made a speech which attracted the attention of the media. And in that speech, the president said that he had the right under the Constitution to take away Guyanese citizenship from anyone who holds dual citizenship. Now what does that mean? And the question is not only what it means, why at this time? That building, as I said, was constructed and was being utilized for more than a year now. But in order to make this an issue, and in order to put the government in a position where it now knows that there are a lot of Guyanese who are returning home to vote, and they do not want those Guyanese to vote for the opposition party, mainly the PPP. Now, if many of these Guyanese are returning with dual citizenship, meaning they have Canadian Guyanese or US Guyanese, the implication of the president's statement is that he had the right under the law, under the Constitution, to take away the Guyanese citizenship from those persons who have either Canadian Guyanese or American Guyanese or whatever dual citizenship. He now is claiming that he had the right to take away the Guyanese citizenship from those Guyanese, leaving them only with their Canadian or American citizenship. And by implication, that means that they will not be allowed to exercise the franchise, because the Guyanese citizenship, within the meaning of the dual citizenship, has been taken away from them. Whether this is a threat or whether this will actually be used just a couple of weeks before the elections is a matter that we have to watch very carefully. Transparency and accountability also manifests itself on the question of the economic front, or on the economic front. The government has mismanaged the economy, and in mismanaging the economy, everyone suffers. Corruption also has to do with transparency and accountability. And we must never get tired of reminding the populace, reminding the diaspora about the infamous drug bond, the Durban Park fiasco, land that was given away, sometimes at rock bottom prices. All of these acts of corruption and more, which will be too numerous to mention on this program, brings into focus the whole question of transparency and accountability. And as I said, we must not fail to keep mentioning these things, because obviously it is in the interest of the government to let these things go away, to sweep these things under the carpet, or not to speak about them anymore. Suffice it to say, if these were matters that were done with the PVP in government, you think the government would, or the opposition would have allowed it to pass? No way. Now that is a question of tit for tat. I am simply saying that it is important to keep referring to these matters, because it is important, while the government is seeking to polish its image up and to make people believe that they are not the bad guys, we must remind the voting population of these many corrupt acts on the part of the government. There is also this question of duplicity. Duplicity meaning a government that says one thing but means another, or does one thing but says something else. Take, for example, this statement by the president that land would be given out to sugar workers. Where is this land that the government or the president is talking about? He also speaks about, in the decade for development, what he calls the program that will save the nation, that they will do away with squatter settlements in the country. The government is depending on the resources from production of oil to deal with these matters. But that is yet left to be seen, because so many promises have been made that it is easy for anyone to recognize that these two matters which the president raised, that is to say, land for sugar workers and doing away with squatting, are fundamentally speaking vote-getting promises. And as one writer said, it looks as though the coalition is desperate in its search for votes. So my friends, this question of duplicity, saying one thing but doing something else, making promises but never fulfilling them, is quite characteristic of the coalition administration, and we must expect more promises during this period. Another issue that has come into greater focus at this point in time, in terms of transparency and accountability, is the question of oil and gas. It is sad to know that we embark on this new area of economic development, of revenue earning, that the nation is so divided. We have to congratulate some of the newspapers, particularly the Starbuck News and the Kaicho News, that has been on a campaign educating the Guyanese people of the extent to which they are being robbed of their wealth by huge production agencies in the area of oil and gas who are acting in complicity with the government. Recently, a global non-governmental organization by the name of Global Witness has issued a report. The government rejected that report and claimed that it was interference in the internal affairs of our country. But a few weeks earlier, Transparency International issued a report which the government quickly accepted. Why? Because the Transparency International report gave the government good marks in terms of fighting corruption in Guyana. So here you have Global Witness issuing a report, and because the government was not pictured in a favorable way, the government rejected the Global Witness report, while on the other hand, they accepted the Transparency International report because it, as we would say in Guyana, it bigged them up and made them look good. But we still have the big issue of the signing bonus of 18 million US dollars. And now we're hearing, according to Global Witness, that $55 billion was that the government walked away basically from $55 billion with the signing away of one of the hugest assets of our country, when the government did not know what was the real value of that asset, meaning its oil and gas potential. Could you imagine a government not knowing what is the real or true value of its oil and gas potential, yet it signs away money, value that should have come to the people of Guyana, amounted to $55 billion. This is almost unbelievable. Imagine a country like Guyana losing $55 billion. It's unacceptable, it's unconscionable. And that is why this has created such a big hue and cry in our country. Because in the same way that no individual or no family wants to lose money, in the same way no country wants to lose money of that big amount. And last but not least, we're hearing about a document called a bridging deed, which is being kept secret from the people of Guyana. And we have to thank Mr. Christopher Ram and many others who have spoken about this bridging deed document, that it needs to be made public. And the Guyanese people who own the resources, who must know these things, must be told about what the facts are in respect to these matters. And this is where we come back to the whole question of transparency and accountability. The government refuses to be transparent. The government refuses to be accountable on these very important matters to the people of Guyana. The same people who they're going to now to re-elect them to office. But the question is, how can a people re-elect or give a second term to a government which has a big problem with the question of transparency and accountability. And my friends, if they refuse to be transparent and accountable to the Guyanese electorate now, one can very well imagine that if they're re-elected, how do we expect them to adhere to transparency and accountability? In other words, they have no track record in these two matters. And if they have no track record, or if they have a track record that is disreputable on the question of transparency and accountability, now, over the past 4 to 5 years, do we expect them to have a laudable track record in the next few years if they're re-elected? Emphasis on if. And so I want to conclude by pointing to 10 basic reasons why the APNU AFC should not be re-elected to office, why they should be rejected by the electorate. The first one is mismanagement of the economy. That's a fundamental question, because everything is about economics and finances. Mismanagement of the economy, number one. Number two, heavy and burdensome taxes. They have taken away billions upon billions of money from the taxpayer, from citizens of Guyana, transformed it into taxes, in the form of taxes, and is splurging it on matters which mean nothing in the lives of the Guyanese people. So burdensome and heavy taxes is number two. Number three is the lack of trust. No trust whatsoever on the part of the people towards the government of the coalition administration. Number four, corruption, like a cancer all over the country. Another reason why this government should not be elected or re-elected to office. Number five, anti-business. This government has a poor track record in respect to the business community. Thousands upon thousands of businessmen, whether small, medium, or big, are reeling under the pressure that has been rolled out on them by this administration. 6, disrespect for law and order. The fundamental issue here had to do with the passage of the no confidence motion and the rule of law vis-a-vis the rulings of the Caribbean Court of Justice. Number 9, disrespect for the Constitution. Every single day almost, the Constitution is being trampled upon. And Guyanese are very much aware of how this is affecting their lives. Next, we have the lack of transparency and accountability as another reason why this government should not be re-elected to office. Then, furthermore, the question of racial and political discrimination, anti-working class policies on the part of the government. And finally, last but not least, the high crime rate. These are reasons why this government should not be re-elected to office. They are simple, they are very straightforward, and they are understandable reasons. And I believe there's a national consensus on these matters, my friends, as we proceed towards the elections of March 2nd, where each and every one of us will make a very fundamental and vital decision as to who we will put the destiny of our children and of our future generation, and in fact the future of Guyana, in whose hands we will place this country. It would seem to me that there's no other alternative, there's no other option, because when you look around at the political and the electoral landscape, the only political party we can point to as an alternative, as a viable alternative, as a practical alternative, as a living alternative, is the People's Progressive Party, Civic. Thank you, my friends, and we will meet again next week on our usual program, Straight Talk.